I have a whole slew of degrees that makes me an expert in the area of design and poverty. That is, well, actually, it's not a whole slew of degrees, it's just one degree. I'm a psychiatrist. And
You're going to be taking arm brain.
yeah. Would you lie down, sir, please? No, you can stay. Which is by way of saying that I have no degrees in any of the things that I'm going to talk about. Everything that I have learned from people who earn less than $1 a day. I started IDE, which is an organization that works to increase the income of people who survive on less than $1 a day in the world. And that was 25 years ago. Now, most of the people that I'm talking about, you probably already know this, but there are 1.2 billion people in the world who earn less than $1 a day. Of those, some 800 million live on tiny farms in poor countries and earn their living from farming. And that's the group that I've been working with. Now, the PowerPoint outlines a lot of this, and you'll get copies of it. I'll give you the data stick, and you'll hand out the copies of the PowerPoint, right? So you don't have to write it all down. Most of it will be in the PowerPoint. So I started off 25 years ago, partly because I ended up working with homeless people as a psychiatrist, and one of the main things about them was that they were poor, and I was curious about that. We started doing things about poverty with them, and that seemed to work, things about housing and jobs. But people who are poor in this country, a homeless person on the streets of Denver earns $600 a month. That is actually a very wealthy person in Bangladesh. So I got curious about what if poverty was so important for psychiatry, what's poverty like in the very poor countries where people live on less than $30 a month, not $600. So I went to Bangladesh because I had some friends who were Mennonites working for the Mennonite Central Committee, and I asked them to introduce me to some poor people. Well, they were working in the village. It's like a Mennonite Peace Corps, and they worked in the village for a couple of years. So they introduced me to some one-acre farmers. And I said to them, why are you poor? And they said, because we don't have enough money. And I said, how could you get out of poverty? And they said, by making more money from farming. And I said, how could you do that? And they said, well, the first thing we need is water, because our crops grow without irrigation and we depend on the rain. And when we grow crops when it rains, everybody else grows them and the prices are low. If we could get water control for our crops, that would be, that's the single biggest thing that we need. So I asked around, and I found a guy who had invented a very low-cost pump. You could buy it for the price of a sack of rice. And that seemed to work pretty well, and he had tested it in Bangladesh. The organization was, again, the Mennonite Central Committee. It's a Mennonite Peace Corps group. They had sold or installed 2,000 of them over 5 years. So I went back to these farmers and said, what do you think of this? They said, geez, that looks good. So without intending to do that, we ended up launching a project to make available thousands of these things. We made a grant application, and we started a first project, which was to make available to poor farmers through the private sector 25,000 of these every year. Now, I set the goal of 25,000, and I pulled that out of the air. It was because it was more than the 2,000, and I didn't think we could do more than 25,000. But over the life of that project, we ended up selling 1.5 million. Was that heaven calling? No, what? So I ended up working full-time to start a new organization to do this kind of work, and I've been doing that for 25 years. And one of the things that I decided to do right away is to talk to 100 of these one-acre farmers every year and learn everything I could about their lives and how they earn their income, and walk with them through their fields. So I did that. So at this point, I have interviewed some more than 3,000 dollar-a-day people in the world and walked with them through their fields. So everything I'm telling you, I'll tell you today, comes from what I learned from them. And what I'd like to do today is give you a quick overview about how I see poverty. I think current approaches to poverty, this is a fairly intellectual term, but so I'm not sure you'll understand it. But I think current approaches to poverty suck. The Millennium Development Goals are not going to be achieved for the most part. And we need nothing less than a revolution in how we think about poverty and what we do about it if we have any hope of changing it. And changing it, the importance of that goes far beyond charity. Poverty is probably the single biggest contributor to the things that threaten the environmental stability of our planet. And I'll talk more about that too. So I'm going to give you a bird's eye view. There's no way we can cover everything. And I'm going to give you a bird's eye view about poverty and about what design is as I see it. Because I might as well start with that. To me, design is not some kind of specialized thing that run by mechanical engineers to make specialized tools. Design is creative problem solving. So I'm going to talk about design, I'm going to talk about poverty, I'm going to talk about design. And I'll be doing that in a way that interacts with you. I understand you have a lot of questions after the first day. And even if I don't know the answer, I'll make something up. So I'm going to start by asking you, just a few of you, because there's so many different things I can talk about, what is it that you want to learn from me, or what are the key things that you would like me to focus on in the next hour and 20 minutes? Yes, sir.
There's a difference between commodity and necessity. Obviously, we have to pay more attention to the necessities of different people and circumstances. But what age group is the most, what age group is the one that has the most necessities, in your opinion?
Yeah, and the first thing you said was commodity?
No, with necessity. Well, there's a difference between designing for commodity and designing for necessity.
Oh, designing for and which age group? Okay, let me just get some other views and I'll just incorporate that in what I present. Yes?
I'd like to hear about your opinion about extending economic opportunity to communities without destroying the cultural cohesion or the sort of the way of life of communities, so that like, the United States hegemony does not continue to spread all over the world. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I didn't catch the first part. So what doesn't continue to spread around the world?
Just sort of like, so the dominant,
Yeah.
so our dominant culture does not.
Is everybody hearing the questions? Okay, yes?
What can we teach our children that in our classes that will make a difference for these people that live on less than $1 a day? What can we take back to the classroom and do to help that?
Okay. And just a couple more. Yes?
I'd like to know about the community of people addressing the problem that are behind the exhibit, and how are they connected in their efforts?
Yeah. So, and you, and the one more after that, and then I'll keep going.
So you mentioned that the current model for international aid sucks.
Yeah.
I'd like to know how design might kind of fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
And to what extent design is a part of the current model.
Okay. And last one for now.
It's really, really important work that you're doing, and it's really cool to hear that you go and meet 100 people a year. How can we as teachers of people that can't travel find out what's needed to direct our resources towards what's needed?
Okay. From time to time, I'll just cut off the discussion so that we can get through stuff. You have to take into account that I'm senile, so I may not remember all of those things, but I will try, and if I don't respond to the questions that have been raised, please remind me, okay? So I'm going to now steam through some of these things to give you a quick overview, and that will include my take on some of the questions that you've raised. Okay. The idea for this exhibit came when I pointed out at an introductory meeting where the Barbara Blomink was in Aspen, that, you know, it's one of those things, 50 designers were in the meeting in Aspen, and each person had 60 seconds to say who they were. And I said that 90% of the world's designers spend all their time addressing the problems of the richest 10% of the world's customers. And I believe a revolution in design is needed to reverse this silly ratio. I said at that thing that before I died, I wanted to see that ratio reversed. And I said that without thinking about it, but then a lot of people were very interested in that. These were some very successful designers, and they knew instantly that that was right. A lot of them had made enough money, and they were just so interested in getting involved, which surprised me. I thought the world focused on the richest 10% because that's where the money is. Actually, people all over the world are just so interested, but they don't have an opportunity, and it's like one of the questions. How can they're working on a branding campaign for the Toyota Prius. How can they get involved in some of these problems, and what's their access? So it's the same question that you have. I don't have to say anything about this one, do I? So design for me is a process of creative problem solving. Actually, the most challenging design issues in many situations involving the other 90% is designing a marketing and distribution strategy, not designing a product. It's designing a marketing and distribution strategy for people who often don't read and write, where there's no mass media. So in a sense, it's like an education or a communication problem. And part of the thing that I want to emphasize with you is, like the last 5 years I've been working hard on writing a book to put some of this stuff down. And what I've been learning is how to tell stories. I think the best way to communicate is by telling stories. So it's a book of stories. Now, a quick background on poverty, and I'll go through this very quickly and stop so that we can then interact about what you think about it. Most of you heard about the Millennium Development Goals? This is 189 countries have agreed that by the year 2015, a number of things related that are important about poverty will be achieved. The first, and to me most important, is to cut in half the percentage of people who live on less than $1 a day. But there are similar goals about hunger, about access to clean water, sanitation, health, the environment, gender equity, and so on. My read is that with business as usual, as I said before, the Millennium Goals on hunger and poverty will never be reached. This is a sample of the progress for the first 12 years of the 25. It's a pretty astounding drop. Thank you for emphasizing this point. This is the astonishing drop in sub-Saharan Africa of the percentage of people living on less than $1 a day over 12 years. That perhaps is unfair because sub-Saharan Africa is probably the area of the world where everybody agrees most of the poverty initiatives haven't worked. But my take on it is that it's very similar for the rest of the world. The main progress has been in China, where the percentage of people living on $1 a day has been cut in half. But the reason for that has nothing to do with the Millennium Development Goals. The real reason is because prior to the time that this started, Mao was able to creatively starve 40 million people to death with his agricultural policies. That is the government, you know about the big famine in China. And just about anything you do after that will make things better. But the government, after Mao, actually implemented a policy where small farms could grow for the market, called decollectivization. So that was a very positive. It unleashed market forces which made the coastal belt of China a world leader in growth. There remain very hungry and poor places in remote rural areas in the Yellow River Basin. I'm going to touch on what I call the 3 great poverty eradication myths. So this is a crash course on my strange views about poverty. It's not in the mainstream, but I hope it will be soon. And there's more attention being paid to this. The first of these is that we can donate people out of poverty. A lot of people feel that that you have to give things to poor people so that they can stop being poor, because they're too poor to buy anything. Jeff Sachs is the head of the UN Millennium Movement, and he believes that poor people need a whole array of essentially donations, that poor rural areas have no infrastructure, so we need to donate to them water systems, agriculture, tools, and once you donate enough in a village, there's the infrastructure and development will take off. I won't go into too much more detail than that, but my experience is that when you have these big giveaway programs, what really happens is that all of the quick buck artists descend like locusts immediately. A lot of stuff goes to Swiss bank accounts. The project gets invested in things that don't make a lasting change. The poor people accept the handouts, knowing that at some point the trough will disappear. And when it's over, things are the same as they were before, only sometimes much worse. I have no question that to get out of poverty, poor people have to invest their own time and money. They have to make their own investment, and if you design things properly, they will step up to the bar and buy them and invest their time in using them. And the little organization that I started, it now has 500 full-time staff working in 9 developing countries. We've helped 17 million people move out of poverty with some of the things that I'm going to describe. The next common myth is one held by economists that you can end poverty by national economic GDP growth. If that's true, then China has had growth of 8% a year for many years. India has had growth of 6% a year. In India, there are 300 million hungry people. The United States has pretty impressive growth. We have a lot of hungry people in the US. So the fact of the matter is that poverty is local. National growth is mainly urban and industrial. The 3/4 of the poverty is rural. And while it does have some positive impact, it will not end poverty. You have to create growth in the places where severe poverty is. The third myth is that multinationals, as they are now, will end poverty. There's a book called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid by Prahalad. There's a whole movement about the bottom of the pyramid. But the sort of assumption in that is that big business, as it is now, will end poverty. That, to me, is a tantalizing myth because big business can make a huge contribution to ending poverty. But big business, the way it is now, does very little, with some exceptions. There needs to be a revolution in how multinationals design their products, price them, and distribute them before they can make an impact. But if they do, they can make a huge impact. $800 million or more of the 1.2 billion people who earn less than $1 a day, that's 20% of the world's population, earn their living from tiny farms. And the fact that so many farms in the world are so tiny is never been incorporated into global agriculture policy or irrigation policy. Let me give you some of so the key to ending poverty, most of the poverty, is small farm prosperity, people like this guy here. Let me give you some of the data that has never been fully understood. There are 525 million farms in the world total. Of those, 85%, 445 million farms, are less than 5 acres. This is world agriculture, including the big farms in the West. Average farm size in Africa is 4 acres. That means that people who earn $1 a day, it's much smaller. In Africa, farms are bigger because there's less rainfall. You need more land and the population isn't as great yet. Farms under 5 acres represent about half of all the cultivated land in most developing countries, some more, some less. And here again is what these people look like. Farms in developing countries are getting smaller. Farms in the West, in the US, Europe, Canada, are big and getting bigger. So if you want to develop efficient agriculture in the West is land rich and people poor. Developing countries is just the reverse. People rich and land poor. So the strategy has to be totally different. So nothing less than 4 revolutions are needed to end poverty. A revolution in water, especially in irrigation, designing a whole range of irrigation tools that fit 1/4 acre plots, because these 1 acre farms are split into 4 or 5 scattered plots. A revolution in agriculture focusing on high value, labor intensive crops that can be grown on a 1/4 acre. Crop rotation, for instance, on a 1/4 acre plot is very different than crop rotation on 1,000 acres. A revolution in design that encompasses all of the tools and strategies needed for poor people. And a revolution in markets, because markets in poor countries have more holes than a barrel full of Swiss cheese. They're just inefficient, and quite often what we spend most of our time in, and most of the money, and by the way, that we do that with a subsidy. The subsidy is in creating markets from scratch. So before I go into the revolution in design, let's stop and I want to hear your reaction to some of these ideas. Yes.
The word revolution is a political term, and the word doesn't seem to have come up too much in what you've been talking about. Surely the word revolution means that there is something political that must underpin everything that you're talking about.
Well, revolution has a lot of different meanings.
But its origins, of course.
Maybe. Would E equals MC squared represent a revolution in your mind?
It was when it happened.
Was it political? It had political overtones. I just came from a meeting at MIT where Amy Smith has organized a one-month design fest where people have come from all over the world to design things for the village. She talked about 3 revolutions that are needed. And I got up right after her and said, I have 4, so that means I'm more revolting than you are. But there are different meanings of the term. Political is part of it. But a revolution in design, a revolution in art, there are many revolutions. So I'm thinking of revolution in that it's an overthrow of, specifically for poverty, it's an overthrow of how we think and what we do about poverty that's needed. And that has political ramifications, but it's not, it doesn't start at the barrel of a gun. If anything, it starts at the barrel of a dollar bill. Yes?
May sound like a silly question, but in your perspective, having been out in the field, what do you think the real root cause of poverty is, and how much does access to raw materials like wood, fiber, plastic, metal play in either getting people out of poverty or lack of access to materials causing poverty?
The root cause of poverty in academia and among the poverty establishment is very complicated, and there are a lot of debates. Some people say that it's powerlessness. Some people say that it's lack of education. Some people say that it's lack of access to health. Some that it's lack of access to transport. Many, like Jeff Sachs, say it's all of those things and you have to attack all at the same time. Some say that it's a lack of access to resources. My definition of poverty is what the poor people tell me when I ask them, what's the root cause of your poverty? And they say it's because we don't have enough money. So that's what I'm focused on. And in truth, when you get more money, I see what happens to these people. I've interviewed them. They gain power. They gain gender equity very often. They educate their kids. A lot of the things that people talk about, but I have no question that the first thing is access to more income. And quite often, you can get access to more income without having the resources. Japan doesn't have a lot of resources. A lot of people do very well, thank you, without having good resources. And in the 1 acre farms, simple things that aren't very expensive that they can invest in will improve their resource base. The thing they don't have is water. You can collect rainwater very cheaply and store it, but you have to do it very cheaply. Others? Yes?
I guess I have a question about farming methods, and do you think that there's still a big to-do about, well, traditional peoples have certain farming methods, and because of the Green Revolution, you have a sense of, well, there's a better way to do it, and there's maybe a gap in a lot of countries where farmers are under the impression that, oh, I need to go out and get these resources, or how do you feel about, I guess, the knowledge of traditional farming practices and maybe that loss of knowledge contributing to more problems with not being able to sustain your family?
First of all, the Green Revolution is not a better way to do it, not for small farms. Green Revolution, but not for the reasons that you're thinking. I don't think.
Go ahead.
The Green Revolution has a lot of environmental things, but again, I really mean when I say my whole thing is based, I'm here as a representative of millions of peasants in the world. They're the ones who are poor. From their point of view, first of all, Green Revolution focuses on rice, wheat, and corn and grain crops. Growing grain crops for the market is a sucker's bet on a 1-acre farm. The best you can do it with rice or wheat is $200 a year. That's the profit you can make. And small farmers, like everybody else, are players in the world market. So if you ask them to grow, and many Green Revolution proponents do, ask them to adopt the Green Revolution and sell the surplus to generate income, then that means they're competing with Canadian 3,000-acre wheat farmers with combines and less, but still significant government subsidies. The small farms, the question is, what do they have? What's their comparative advantage in global markets? And it's the lowest labor rates in the world, 5 cents an hour. So what our agricultural strategy is to encourage them, first of all, they're all motivated to grow enough food to feed their family if they have enough land. So the problem with Green Revolution to grow more food is that the inputs are expensive and that they're high risk. These are very risk-averse people because they need to be to survive. So if you invest $50 to triple your yield, if you're in Bangladesh and every 10 years there's a flood that wipes out your fertilizer, any rational decision maker will only invest what they can afford to lose in a 10-year flood. So they invest much less than the experts say they should. But there are traditional, now you get back to traditional. There's a priest in Madagascar who developed a way of growing rice that doubles the yield without a lot of inputs. It's called now System for Rice Intensification. We've had very good luck with that. It requires very little investment. Instead of flooding the rice, you grow it like tomato plants and you water it. Secondly, and this is the main thing we've done, we help farmers select 4 or 5 labor-intensive, high-value, off-season cash crops. With that, you can earn, after expenses, $500 from a 1/4 acre of drip-irrigated fruits and vegetables, for instance. Diversified so that it's too much of a risk to grow one. You have to help in access to market. But that's pretty straightforward, and they can clear $500 from a 1/4 acre, and that effectively moves them into the middle class. So I've given you a long-winded answer to your question, but it covers a lot of ground about what really works with this population. And by the way, I feel the same opportunity is available in slums. That is, take low-cost labor and harness it to grow high-value, labor-intensive crops. This museum could be selling handmade museum pottery replicas produced in the slum of Dharavi, because there are 1,200 potters in Dharavi making water pots and flower pots, and they're competing with plastic, just like growing rice, wheat, and corn competes with Canadian wheat farmers. Okay, now I'm sorry for the long-winded, but it gets a whole bunch of information across. A few more? Yes?
I guess kind of on that, you mentioned markets. I was just curious, and to share that with my students, where are the closest markets? You talk about the market and they have to find transport. For these rural farmers, how far are we?
Again, you have to don't think of them as stereotypically, because markets are as different as if you live in Harlem or in Appalachia. We think about agroclimatic zones. And in Bangladesh, where you have 120 million people in a landmass half the size of Colorado, there is a huge market and virtually everybody is fairly close to it, and there are traders that come to the farm gate and buy your stuff. In Zambia, where we work, it's the most dispersed population, and if you encourage people to grow high-value crops, you'll flood the market very quickly, and you have to actually hook them up with exporters into Europe or somewhere and grow crops like that. So so you have to design a strategy that's different for each place. And there's all those things in between. There are some people that are too far away, but even those have a village and they can sell vegetables to other people in the village. Okay? Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, how much of this depends on hybrid plant science and the designing of new strains and varieties and those kinds of things? Because that's what we did here in American agriculture in a whole lot of ways, is we...
Depends on what you're growing. There is a species of hybrid eggplant that is far better than the average eggplant. We recommend that. SRI uses traditional varieties, and we recommend that. Whatever works. Yes?
Some economy of scale issues. I'm wondering why always 1 acre? Could there be a collective or a cooperative that would increase?
Yes, and collectives work, but what is often not understood is the transaction costs. You organize. Farmers tend to be, if there's one stereotype, farmers are stubborn. They don't cooperate very well. To organize them into a co-op requires a great deal of time and energy, but in some cases it's the only way to do it. But we will do that only if it's the only way. Otherwise, we design things for individual farms because it's the most direct way. And economy of scale is overrated. You have to, again, evaluate the marketplace in each situation. So here's a crazy example. We were looking at saving the rainforest, which is off our main topic. But IDE did a project there, and the rubber tappers are the most effective, talk about politics, they're the most effective political action group to stop cutting the rainforest. They make more money from Brazil nuts than from rubber. And they gather Brazil nuts in the rainforest, ship it on a barge for 2 weeks to the city at the mouth of the Amazon River, where it's processed in large processing plants. That means it's dried and shelled and packaged. And those plants have economy of scale. However, 1/2 of those Brazil nuts spoil because of mold on the 2-week barge ride down the river. 2/3 or 3/4 of the weight is in the shell. So we introduced a way of replicating what the centralized plants do at the rainforest gathering point, and it made more money. Simply because you recouped the spoilage. And then we hooked up to Ben & Jerry's, and we flew the processed nuts directly to the market. You see what I mean? So there are opportunities, but you have to evaluate each product to see whether the market makes it better at the village or centralized. There's no rule. Whatever works. Yes, sir?
Talking about helping individual farmers, how does that play out in a community where 95% of people are farmers in a village, and you help out one farmer, or do you help out a community of farmers individually, or what does that look like?
I'm going to talk more about that. We do mass marketing, and we help a lot of farmers. So by the time you get 10,000 people with a treadle pump making $100 a year more, you've created a huge thing in the whole village. So what you do is, so 2 or 3 other rules of thumb, and then I need to go on so I can get through some of the material about design, and we can interact some more. But basically, all the products or services we design are sold at a fair market price without subsidy. Farmers have to invest in them, or anybody has to invest in them. But they're designed to be so cheap that they can afford it. And they we design for a 300% net return per year on the purchase price. And then if you carry out a promotion and marketing thing, they're delivered by the private sector, so that continues after we're gone, after we build the sales, the marketing thing. And we shoot for doing millions of them. So let me run through some of the design things. So I purposely wanted to get into a discussion about the basic background about poverty before getting into design. And now I'll do 10 or 15 minutes on design. This is just a brief tour now, and but it'll give you an idea. Is this, am I going too fast? How's it going? It's okay? More jokes. The organization that I started 25 years ago is called IDE. I initiated a succession process 2 years ago, so we have a new CEO, Rosalind Cortesaro. She's been around for a month, and I'm going to continue helping IDE and her, but I've started a new organization called Design for the Other 90%, and it has 4 missions. The first is to change the way design is taught in developed countries, and that talking with you here is part of that. Doing the same thing in developing countries, that's a little trickier. There is a huge movement in the West, and I don't understand it. But I helped Stanford create a course called Design for Extreme Affordability. They have 40 graduate students in teams every year. Jim Patel, who's a business professor there, says that 10 years ago, the typical student said, teach me to be Bill Gates, and not the Bill Gates who started the foundation, but the Bill Gates who made a ton of money. Now the typical business student, the person coming for an MBA, says, teach me to make a difference. And it is amazing to me how much students everywhere in the West, Europe, Canada, the US, are interested in this. I could give talks for 3 lifetimes to universities doing this. And I hope there's a similar interest in K through 12. I want to create a platform for 10,000 of the world's best designers to address the problems of the other 90%. And the 4th piece, I want to start some major global businesses that make tons of money serving this population to serve as a model for multinationals. Because in the end, you can't do this work based on charity. You have to do it because there's money in it. And if we can demonstrate that you can make money and help people at the same time, but this has to be done on a large scale to interest multinationals. But you can't design for the other 90% without being in the context. So here is a student from Stanford in Myanmar, used to be Burma, gaining personal experience with a low-cost sprinkling system. There are huge numbers of people in the world who irrigate with watering cans like this. Nobody's ever counted them. I think in Africa there are at least 10 million bucket farmers. This is the typical way of distributing water in Myanmar. I somehow went backwards. For me, design for the other 90% is based on what I call the ruthless pursuit of affordability. If you're going to buy it as a customer without subsidy, and you've got $1 a day and 1,000 places that are desperately important to spend it on, you better make it cheap. And that is the art in the design process. How many of you know who Vince Lombardi is? It tells my age, a famous coach of the Green Bay Packers. He said, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. I start with what I call my don't bother trilogy. If you're going to design a product or service for the other 90%. If you haven't had conversations with at least 25 poor people before you start, and you can do this by proxy, you don't have to go to Myanmar to do it, but it's best to have some direct understanding of the people you're designing for and the context and some mechanism of feedback from them, because you can't do it in a vacuum. If it won't pay for itself in the first year, and this is based on everybody saying to get out of poverty we need to make more money, and people who earn $1 a day don't use the investment criteria that we use here. 20% return would be fantastic. No, everything we design actually with some exceptions, pays for itself 3 times in the first year and forever. Now I went backwards again. And here's the third one. If you can't sell at least 1 million of them, don't bother. The reason I say that is that it takes a lot of effort and time. There's a significant cost, not just a money cost, to design something. You might as well select those things that will make a huge impact. If you go to a village, you can identify 1,000 important problems right away. You might as well work on something that is useful not only in the village, but in other villages in the country and all over the world. And I can give you 100 examples of that. Here are some of the things poor people need. This exhibit has the $100 computer, but that's far too expensive for the bottom of the pyramid. Now the 90% includes people who earn $5, $4, $3. I think the most important group is the $1 group, because if you can design for them, the stuff will be used by the rest. But if you design for 5, it's too expensive for the 4. So I think it's possible to design a $25 computer using a cell phone as a basic model, because that's a computer, and stripping it down to the key functions that a 1 acre farmer needs. We have a lot of bells and whistles that are not necessary. So here I have a few other things. There are many more. A $10 solar lantern, we've already developed one. I've started a company that will sell for $12. A $5 household water filter. Most of these rural people have actually their own houses and their own little patch of land that they inherited. But the house has 0 value. If they sell it, it has 0 value. If they go to the bank, they won't loan any money. I think we need to design a $100 house that has both market and collateral value. Here again is to give you an idea of what this feels like. Is a typical farmer. Key features are affordability. I've already talked about that. It has to be cheap enough to be affordable, and this assumes that you're going to sell it. People will invest in it at a fair market price without subsidy. Divisibility. The big problem is that a tractor can't be broken into small parts. A combine doesn't have enough space to turn around in on a 1/4 acre plot, much less work. So you need something that is broken into small components. And expandability, the ideal thing. We have a drip irrigation system that sells for $3. It'll do a kitchen garden. It'll earn $10 and help feed the family. And with that $10, you can double its size, but you don't have to buy a new one, you just add to it. So that infinite expandability is an important feature. This is what it looks like. It's a bag instead of a bucket. It's at shoulder length, shoulder height. This woman is bringing up water with a rope and washer pump, which goes fairly deep and is fairly cheap. And it delivers water to the plants, drop by drop, and it's much more efficient than other ways of delivering water. The building blocks, and I'm going to skim through these, and you'll have them in your available. The small farmer or substitute the poor customer sits at the top of the design process. If you have to think out of the box to solve the problem, design a new box. Schumacher and ITDG, the gentleman here from, I think, from London, did you say? Schumacher's organization used to have the clumsy name of Intermediate Technology Development Group, ITDG. Now they're Practical Action. I always think of the opposite, so I think of impractical passivity. But that group is based on a book that made a big impact, Small is Beautiful. The problem with the appropriate technology movement is that it was inhabited by a race of tinkerers instead of people designing for the marketplace. So a lot of things are too expensive. Many of the things designed by that movement are gathering dust on shelves You got to design for the marketplace. And the key part of that is affordability. Cheap is beautiful too. Here's a woman on a treadle pump in Bangladesh who ran into the house and put on her sari when she saw the camera coming. By the way, these are great people. They are not poor, pitiful. They are entrepreneurs. They're survival entrepreneurs. Sometimes you have to count your fingers when you shake hands. But these are very interesting people. I don't think of poverty as a depressing or I think it's exciting. I've learned more and been inspired more by talking to these people than I've given to them. I keep putting my finger on the wrong thing. Put tools on a radical weight loss diet. In many situations when you're designing a tool, its price can be perfectly predicted by weighing it. So in the drip system, one of the ways we cut the price by 80% is by lowering the pressure. You don't need high pressure to reach a small field. So you put the thing, you set up a gravity tank. For a bigger plot, it's a 55-gallon drum, but it's replaced by a plastic bag now. You put it at shoulder height, and that's enough pressure. If you don't have much pressure, you can cut down the wall thickness of the tubes that bring the water. You see what I mean? So you lower the weight. You find ways of lowering the weight. Make redundancy redundant. We over-design things because of the risk of lawsuit in the West. That's much less of a risk. So you actually design something to the point where it breaks and you back off a scotch instead of taking a bridge for a 5-ton truck and making it 20-ton. Move forward by designing backward. Very often, if you look at the history of any tool, 40 years ago, it was in the right form for quarter-acre farms. And you can apply modern tools to it. The drip system we use now, in the beginning, drip irrigation was discovered in Israel by somebody with a leaky pipe, and a big plant grew up beside it. So they had pipes with holes. And now they got high-tech emitters, high pressure, information from satellites. We went back to punching holes in pipe. But we added modern plastics, a bunch of stuff with that. Expandable, I already said. Here's what a market looks like, a typical village market. To make things cheap, there are some key trade-offs. One is capital for labor. If you have a drip system with a line going beside every row, you can get the kids to shift it and cut the investment in pipes in half. Quality for affordability. We have a big thing here about quality. One of the main things that designers design for is durability. Poor people will trade off durability in a minute. When we offered 3 different durabilities for treadle pumps, one was 2 years, one was 4 years, and one was 7, 55% of the customers, knowing what they were buying, opted for the cheapest, the 2-year life. The reason is that if you can't afford it, it's useless. If you get it for 2 years, you invest $25 for a pump and a well, you start earning $100 a year, you'll baby it through 3 or 4 years, and in the end, you've got enough money to buy a 7-year product or get your daughter married off by paying the dowry. So having a product that lasts a long time will be traded off in a minute in favor of affordability if it returns 300% a year. One of the problems in many parts of the world is that there isn't any water for the irrigation. I said before how important irrigation is. But virtually every place has a rainy season, and you can trap rainwater, you can harvest rainwater. The most important place to put it to work, though, is in the driest time of the year, when nobody has any water, so crop prices are 3 times the normal size. So what we have been working on is affordable water storage. This is one of our first attempts. It's sort of like a hefty bag, but that is 10 meters, 35 feet long, and 1 meter in diameter. And it's thin-walled plastic because it doesn't have to, the plastic walls don't have to be strong enough to keep them from bursting, but because you dig a trench. So this is 10 cubic meters, 10,000 liters, about 2,500 gallons. It costs about $40. What we're working on now is enough water stored to drip irrigate a quarter acre and make $500 in places where there is no water from streams, water from rivers, or water in the ground. And that is simply a pond that is 10 meters by 10 meters by 2 meters deep, let's say 35 by 35 by 7 feet. Lined with plastic, and the design problem is how to design that plastic so that it's cheap enough, even if it only lasts 2 years, and then with some kind of a floating lid. That's it. It's not rocket science. We figure that'll cost about $400, so it doesn't meet the 300% return. But a source of water when you don't have one is so critical. People will pop for that in a hurry, especially with credit. And then you make $500. You have to invest. If you can build it for $4, and then your drip system and inputs and seeds cost another $100. You're talking about an investment of $500. You clear $500 fairly easily in the first year, and you're away to the races. These are kind of, I'm giving these as examples of the kind of problems, you know, I have no degree in engineering or in design, but in talking to people, it's clear that this is one of the things they needed. And I'll just go through this very quickly because I'm running out of time. These are some of the steps. If you identify the key contributors to cost of any technology, you can design around them. Here's a drip system in India, I think, growing flowers and a variety of other things. You always have to have continuing interaction with the customer. So when we design something, we build a prototype, we put, with the drip systems, we put 10 drip systems out with farmers in the hills of Nepal. They told us what was wrong with them, we fixed it, put it out again. That was a 7-year process, but I think low-cost drip has a huge global market now. And if you're taking a system from Nepal to India, or from India to Myanmar, or to Zambia, you have to adapt it, do the same thing, and adapt it to local conditions. Here's a bucket kit. The original bucket kit was a bucket, but that bucket is $2, and we replaced it with a 2-walled plastic bag for 30 cents. And this is the final thing. So treadle pumps is the first product that we learned a lot from. We've now installed 2.1 million treadle pumps. This is a farmer using a treadle pump. Kids can use it. It's a Stairmaster. It's a suction pump that hauls water from the limits of suction are 33 feet, but within efficiency 25 feet. But basically it works best when you're pumping water from the ground 12 feet up, the actual lift. The sand layer can be 40 feet down. Bangladesh is virtually all shallow water. So in the dry season, you can grow another crop by putting a straw in the ground and sucking up water. Oh, I keep putting my finger in the wrong thing. To create the market, the marketplace in Bangladesh, to give you an idea, consisted of 75 little workshops that we talked the first 4 into going into business. And then there were 75 little workshops with a welder, maybe costs $2,000 investment. Some of them are already making bed springs. We recruited 3,000 village dealers who sold these things with a 12% markup. We trained 3,000 well drillers. These are sort of village fixer-up people. We did a 3-day course with a certificate, much like you guys are doing a course here. This is what a village dealer looks like. Key challenges of the marketing. So we produced a 90-minute movie every year in Bangladesh. We cost about $25,000. We hired the best director, the top male lead, the top female lead. A movie in Bangladesh, a typical Bangladeshi movie, has a wedding, a funeral, a near suicide, and lots of singing and dancing. This movie played to 1 million people a year because we had to develop name recognition. I'm just giving you an idea of what it takes on the market. And this is the real design, the most challenging design piece, not the treadle pump. The plot was boy meets girl, girl wants to get married, her father is too poor to have a dowry, so she can't get married. She falls into the clutches of a dowry bandit. What was that? You got it. But before that happened, everything stopped. At the high tension moment, the village dealers who brought their customers to the showing. By the way, you put on one of these things. This is with a generator and a truck. You get 3,000 to 5,000 people in an open air setting. The dealers put up treadle pumps and allow potential customers to try them. Then a friend of the father tells him about the treadle pump. He puts in a treadle pump, makes enough money, he pays for the dowry, they get married and live happily ever afterwards, but it took 90 minutes. But these are the kinds of things, it's the design of the marketing and promotion, because each of those dealers has to have enough sales volume to make a living. And when they do, you can pull out, and there's about 50,000 treadle pumps being sold each year without our involvement through the private sector system that we created or helped stimulate. We didn't create it. So here are some of the impacts. There are 2.1 million poor families in Asia and Africa. They invested more than $50 million to buy treadle pumps, and they increased their income by $210 million a year. It would have cost $2 billion to put the same number of acres under irrigation through a canal system, dam and canal system. And to finish up, and I won't go into that, I've got 12 steps for practical problem solving. It's really a design approach. I'll maybe go into the first 3. Over the whole 25-year history of IDE, donors and others have invested $78 million. That's the total cost of our organization for 25 years. It's gotten much bigger as time went on. Dollar a Day Poor People invested $139 million of their own money. So there's a huge, you can attract a huge investment by poor people, unlike what many people in poverty say. And the impact is that they are earning $288 million a year net from their investment. And those things are, the same approach can be used for about 600 million poor people, about half of the poor people in the world. 3/4 of the farmers. This is the way they invested some of this. I want to just emphasize the first 3 of these. If you take any practical problem, the first step is go to where the action is. Don't sit on your butt in your office or in your classroom. Go to where the action is that you're interested in. Talk to the people who have the problem and actually listen to what they have to say. A lot of people are experts. They talk to people, but they don't listen. And the third thing is learn everything you can about the specific context. With that, you can design a solution to just about anything. There's a bunch of more of these. And that's the end. So let me stop there, and we have time now to interact. Yes, sir.
Once you achieve your goal of putting more dollars in the hands of these families,
yeah,
how do you go about educating them on some personal issues, for example, turning into a consumer, and some societal issues where I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Africa, and I did small gardens, and once the women started making money, some of them stayed inside more, or they bought a TV, and 90% of all the living was done outside in the village. Now it's starting to move inside and become more personal. Do you do any educating on those 2 issues?
The first education is educating yourself and learning about them. and learning about why they want to go inside and stuff like that. The second thing is, this is all education. It's not classroom education. If you can make more money with vegetables as you did, that's education. And I don't like the sort of assumptions of if people make more money and
They will have more leisure time to be laying around.
or they're going to screw it up. A lot of times you find that when you learn about why they do stuff, it makes very good sense. That said, quite often they don't have, a lot of people have never been more than 2 kilometers outside their village, so they don't have access to information and stuff you can bring. So what was your instinct when these people made more money about what they could do with it that was more productive? And did you do an education thing for them?
I was a dairy farmer.
Yeah. So I'm a psychiatrist, so what?
But one of the things that I really recognized was they started a hydroelectric dam project in the next village over.
Yeah.
We didn't have electric yet, but we had the towers in the villages.
Yeah.
Some of the villagers that I worked with took some of the money they earned and bought a TV. They had a TV sitting in their hut, but they didn't have any electricity. They were getting ready for some of the stuff that we're used to. Again, we're always going to have the have and the have-nots.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering if you do any financial education. Once you start making that money, put it back into your business or buy a TV.
We survey people systematically, and I've interviewed a lot of people asking them, what did you do with the money? And I think they're pretty shrewd. Now, they invested in some things I wouldn't. They put a lot of money into ceremonies. But that's important to them.
Yeah.
They put a lot of money into dowries in Asia. That's a total waste. I think that whole practice sucks, but I can't tell them not to do that. They invest a lot in agriculture. I can certainly help with that. They invest in educating their kids, and a lot of times they have lousy schools. So all these other things that people describe as root causes of poverty, they invest in under their own values, which is the way it should be. And you can help with that process. And you can design things. You can design classrooms that are better. You can design ways of attracting teachers, because a lot of the teachers in those places can't read and write. You see what I mean? So it's a lot of stuff like that. And one of the things I want to mention, I was talking beforehand, a way to communicate about all of this is through stories. So if you're communicating with people in your classroom, do it through stories. The challenge I had in writing the book was how to write stories. So I wrote a whole book of stories. And I was thinking, there's one story that goes through the whole book. When the book talks about water, it's introduced by Krishna Bahadur Tapa's family and what they did about water. And I never thought about that before, but maybe I can pull that story out of every chapter and make that story available. Or the stories in the book might be available, or you have your stories from your Peace Corps. You see, if you look about how to get to the context, Caltech did a program of design for students at Caltech. They were helping villages in Guatemala, and they said, how the hell can we connect to a village in Guatemala? And they said, well, you know what? We have 6 professors at Caltech who are from Guatemala. And we have a hell of a lot of people living in our town who are from Guatemala. We'll use them as communicators for the village. And then they linked up with a university in Guatemala, so their design teams have students from Guatemala on them. And now their students are visiting Guatemala. But there are various ways of doing it. In your community, you have an African village. You have a number of people who can act as markers for an African village. You can bring them to your classroom. Or you can, you know people from where you work. Which country did you work in?
Lesotho, completely surrounded by South Africa.
Yeah. So you have a connection there. You can hire somebody for $300 a month who will act as your communicator from Lesotho if you're designing something for Lesotho, and they can They can send emails. You can messenger videotapes of the contraption you designed and have people go door to door. You can send, there's all kinds of things about how to do that. Yes?
After the farmers start producing more money and having more income, do their expectations for their children change? Like here, for the longest time, if your parents were a certain trade, then your parents expected you to go into that trade, and now American society says you can be anything you want to be. How does that change their, the way, or has it changed the way that they think about it? Or do they expect their children to be farmers also?
So, see, a lot of these things are very complicated, and some of you know all this stuff, but see, their dream for their kids, like what you're talking about, is that they could get one of their sons in Asia, not daughters, educated, so that they could get a government sinecure, some kind of government job. They'd never have to get their hands dirty again, and then they could support the family. And if they really are successful, they could get a government job that brings in so many bribes that it would support the family. And part of the tragedy is that the education system in many of these countries is, in my opinion, pretty much worthless, in that it doesn't teach people how to deal with practical problems of living in the village. The other things are important, but in India there's a hell of a lot of people with master's degrees working as bussers. And when you get a degree in engineering, quite often you're not their dream is to come to Silicon Valley or to get a job as the head of the road department in a community where they get kickbacks, but not to do things for their village, although they send money back to the village from their work, you see. So this is what I mean about revolution. All the systems are designed in a counterproductive way. That said, when the family has money, they have the freedom to choose. They educate their kids. They can move to the city. That's the critical thing. It's not about controlling life. It's about doing something that moves things in a better direction. And anything you do will have negative impacts as well as positive. But the positive are more like, if you're successful, you have more positive than negative. This whole exhibit was put together somewhat by accident. I don't mean it was put together by accident by Cooper Hewitt, but I made a chance remark. Barbara Blomink said we should have an exhibit. I was against it because I was too busy. And then Cooper Hewitt got all this stuff together. I talked to people at the Smithsonian in Washington about linking up, and I just found out this morning that they did. I didn't know that happened. So a lot of things came together, and things that were totally beyond my control. And that's the way life is. I'm not in any way trying to shape these families' lives for the future. I'm trying to help them create a life for themselves with more options, that's all. Yes, sir?
Paul, isn't one of the lessons maybe then that we should be talking to our children about, maybe one of the stories we should be telling them, is about this is an area of huge interdependence of factors. There are interdependence at every level. When we're teaching as design teachers, these problems seem to be ones where that they're multifactorial, and they are ones where there is high level of interdependence. You make a change to one thing, and it has a change to another, which has a change to another. And in terms of teaching our children, it seems to me that that's an overarching message that we need to give them. And also that there is huge uncertainty, because you make a change to one thing and you can't be quite sure what the consequences will be. And in a way, that's a little bit what you're talking about there. We're making these changes to the way these people live, and we're not quite sure what's going to happen down the street. I mean, isn't that an important message beyond designing?
Yes, but I think you have to be very careful, because you don't want to say in that message things are interdependent. The things happen beyond your control, so you better sit on your ass.
No, I don't think it's a recipe.
No, I know, but I hear that very often, and with, knowing all that, I'm astonished by what one person can do. And you gotta convey that first. At least, that's what I believe. IDE has had a much bigger impact than I ever anticipated. And I don't know what will come about as a result of our talking this morning. Maybe nothing. But my experience is that huge things come out of things like this. And you let yourself be involved in the process without controlling it. I'm not going to try to control what you teach. I want to convey to you some of the things that I've experienced, and you have to figure out how you'll use it or if you'll use it. And what happens out of this, who knows? But part of that challenge and mystery, and more will happen if we communicate with each other and I learn from you as you learn from me than if I give you a lecture. So I always check to learn about. I spent some time talking to people here about who you were. You see what I'm saying? It's a way of creating energy and making revolutions is through people, and it's a very complicated process. But when you do it with an ability to listen, some amazing things happen. Yes.
Your first great poverty eradication myth was that we can donate people out of poverty. And listening to you and your lecture, it strikes me that we can learn some lessons about poverty in our own country. As an educator, and at my school, we spend a lot of time talking about kids who struggle through the education process because of their socioeconomic status and all the hindrances of poverty, which, as you define poverty, they are not in poverty. They come to school with free and reduced lunch options. They have status clothes, but their poverty often is generational, and they don't understand the concept of education being their bridge or step out of poverty. So how can we apply the lessons of global poverty to?
They're totally applicable both in rural and urban poverty, and all I can say is, like I came back after 10 years, and I got interested in learning more about homelessness, so I asked a friend, Mary Ann Gleason, who's a nun actually, running a medical clinic for people in Denver who were homeless, to introduce me to some, because I wanted to learn about them. So she introduced me to Joe, and he blew me away. I spent the day with him. I brought a video camera. He lived under a loading dock. So I went right with him. This was in December, and it was snowing, and how the hell can you survive when it's below freezing and you're living under a loading dock? So I went with him to the loading dock by the railroads, but first thing that blew me away, his main occupation was a volunteer. He's homeless, but he's working as a volunteer in the soup kitchen, and he's getting food from that. And he was carrying some soup for a buddy who had frostbitten feet who lived in a close by loading dock. So we delivered the soup. The loading dock was about 2.5 feet high, the space. He had a triple plastic entryway with 3 rocks on top and some things on the bottom. Inside there was a carpet that he got from the railroad workers who were his buddies. He had a hook in the back wall with a lantern. He had a 35 below sleeping bag. He refused to go to Jesus Saves with 1 S because, as he said on the video, they do all that brain bashing or something. It's a bad trade-off. It's undignified. So he preferred to sleep out and have some money for brandy. He liked apricot brandy, cheap. He gave plasma. He needed a place to store his stuff, and the bus station was a ripoff. It said it was 75 cents. If you came back 2 hours later, you had to pay $2.25 to get your stuff out of Hawk, and you couldn't do nothing about it. But the railroad station was really 75 cents. So I went with him to the railroad station, to the liquor store. I spent the day with him. I learned more and had more ideas from that day than anything you can imagine. One was that there were 3,000 homeless people then. If they had $500 a month each income, that's $1.5 million a month in income that you could tap into. If they need storage, why couldn't you find a building somewhere and help people organize a safe storage thing run by homeless people? You see what I mean? So what I'm saying is, some of these things are next door. There's a lot of poverty here. Don't teach about homelessness from a book. Go talk to some homeless people. If you're interested in HIV/AIDS, go talk to some people with HIV/AIDS and tell stories to your students about it. You see what I'm saying? This is not about just villages in Bangladesh. It's about life. Yes?
What it seems like you've done is been very successful in looking from the other point of view, which is something that's very hard to do. We contribute, like it ends up being giving. Your design revolution, you're contributing that, but you're also going from the other point of view without passing any judgment or the expectation afterwards. And that's something that's hard for us. I mean, we're free and reduced lunch, you're coming dressed like this, and already there's a little cloud of judgment without maybe going to the other side. And it seems like, as I hear you talk, that you've been very successful of going to the other side and seeing through those eyes without any judgment or expectation. And I think that's giving credit to you, because that's a very hard thing to do.
It's very hard and it's very easy. And isn't that what education is?
Yeah.
I mean, I live to learn stuff. I love satisfying my curiosity, and going and learning is how you can solve problems. You've got to learn about what it is that you're teaching, and not theoretically. And then when I learn that, I find that a lot of the experts in the field are wrong, and it's actually an advantage to have no education at all. It's not really an advantage, but I am at a big disadvantage in irrigation, so I have people who are world experts in irrigation who are helping, and they correct my mistakes on the technical details. But I teach them about affordability, because getting that degree doesn't teach them about how important affordability is for this population. So we learn from each other, and that's what it's all about. So it's like that. You can do this yourself. It's not that complicated. You have to be curious and a little bit entrepreneurial, and you have to be careful not to take undue risks. But Marianne Gleason would have told me what the risks are, and I checked that out. But I had no problem going right away to that guy's place, and to going where they ate meals. They had a discarded charcoal grill, and all that other stuff. There's so much out there to learn, and then you can teach when you yourself have learned. But you can't teach just from a book. I mean, these concepts may be useful, but you've got to understand what the people that you're designing for, who they are, what their life space is, what their values are. And then all kinds of very simple things open up. That 200 cubic meter water storage thing is the simplest thing in the world. But it will reach probably 40, 50 million people if we design it right. Yes.
I'm from Florida, and my mom and dad run a non-for-profit agency where they work with the homeless, and they actually, very narrowed, they feed the hungry, the working homeless hungry. My question is that they have truly, or my point is that they have truly narrowed their focus, because people migrate to Florida because it's warm, so the homeless population stays populated. My question is, how does your organization choose people to partner with, the partnerships that you choose, with the need being so vast? So how do you make the choice when there are so many people with such a need?
I think providing food for people that are homeless is very important. It's a critical thing. But this is going to get almost drearily repetitious. If I was running a soup kitchen for the homeless, I would talk to a hell of a lot of homeless people and ask them what their main problem was. And if their main problem, it continues to be food, I would continue with that. But I would branch into other stuff if their main problem was something else.
No, I'm sorry. How does your organization choose to keep it narrow? That is their focus. Their focus is to do that. They've worked with people and they've had the conversations.
Yes.
My point is they really do keep it really narrow because the need in the area
is huge.
That they are is that.
So how does my organization keep its
How does your
focus?
organization
With great difficulty. Because I'm interested in a lot all and so they have to restrain me.
Right, I'll be all over the place.
Usually
Absolutely
physically.
all over the place.
At the same time, it's amazing how many balls you can juggle. And so, to some extent, that's why I've handed over IDE. Now I can work in slums, because there's a lot of stuff to do, and I couldn't do that while we're working primarily with rural poverty. I can work on, there's a billion people who need eyeglasses, and all you need is the rack in drugstores that you pick out reading glasses with, made more sturdy and put all over the world on the back of a bicycle. And you can reach 500 million of those. I can do that now, but I couldn't do that before. You have to have a focus.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's an ongoing problem, especially with somebody like me running it.
It'd be challenging for myself. You want to do a little bit of everything.
Yeah. But quite often you can enlist other people to do some of the other things. So we keep a sort of a balance. And we do have, like IDE has a smaller initiative for drinking water, because it's also water related and a lot of things cross over. And we do a thing about social marketing, because that's sort of related. But our main thing is making more money for $1 a day, 1 acre farmers. And we've kept fairly focused, but not too narrow, because you've got to change it in each culture.
Sure.
It's an ongoing problem, as you know from your parents' thing.
I'm sure.
How are we doing on time? I'm running over, right?